When Julianna Pena choked out Amanda Nunes to win the UFC women's bantamweight title on Saturday, it sent shockwaves through the world of mixed martial arts. From that moment onward, the two fighters, one a decorated veteran widely considered the greatest to ever step into the octagon, the other an oft-injured journeywoman, became forever intertwined, their legacies inextricably linked. Because Pena's second round submission of Nunes wasn't just shocking. It wasn't just a 7-1 underdog vanquishing a heavy favorite. It was, in fact, the greatest upset in UFC history. Why is that? Let's break it down. Sit back, relax, and take this in. Today's episode of Take This In is presented by Advil, fast pain relief you can trust. On that note, you can continue trusting us to bring you top quality content, so hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and help us to get to 100,000 subs. While UFC history is replete with crazy upsets, two clearly stood out from the rest prior to UFC 269. Matt Serra defeating George St. Pierre in 2007, and Holly Holm defeating Ronda Rousey in 2015. Let's start with Serra GSP. Serra joined the UFC in 2001 and put together a meager 4-4 record through his first 8 fights. Following his UFC release, he was given an opportunity to compete on The Ultimate Fighter: The Comeback. The show gave former UFC fighters a second chance, and the winner would receive a title shot in their respective division. Serra was crowned the season's welterweight champion, earning him a shot at St. Pierre's title. And he promptly knocked out St. Pierre at UFC 69 in 2007 to become the new champ. Serra over St. Pierre is likely still the biggest skill gap a challenger overcame in a UFC title fight. But what puts this upset behind Amanda Nunes is the fact that St. Pierre wasn't established as a dominant champion yet. St. Pierre, who avenged the Serra loss in a rematch a year later, is considered one of the greatest fighters of all time today, but that wasn't the case in 2007. The Quebec native had fought in the UFC 9 times, going 8-1, and had just become the new champion. Serra was his first challenger. Think about all the wins that made St. Pierre one of the best ever. Jos Koscheck, Carlos Condit, Michael Bisping for the middleweight title, Jake Shields, Thiago Alves, the BJ Penn stoppage, the second Matt Hughes win. All of those happened after Serra knocked GSP out. At the time of that loss, St. Pierre was a promising 25-year-old title holder, but that all-time greatness came later. That brings us to today's trivia question, presented by Advil, fast pain relief you can trust. Which fighter owns the longest winning streak in UFC history? The correct answer is Anderson Silva, who won 16 consecutive fights between 2006 and 2013 and boasts the longest title reign in UFC history at 2,457 days. Back to today's show though, and that unforgettable Holm Rousey fight, the biggest upset in women's MMA before Saturday. Unlike Serra GSP, this one was more about Rousey's dominance rather than Holm's ability. Rousey, the biggest star in MMA at the time, was 12-0 and had successfully defended the women's bantamweight title 6 times. 5 of those wins came in the first round, 3 came in under a minute, and 2 in 16 seconds or less. Ronda Rousey fights were spectacles. People tuned in just to see how long they would last. So of course, when Holm, 2-0 in the UFC at the time, marched into the octagon at UFC 193 back in 2015 and knocked Rousey out in the second round, it came as a surprise. Rousey was one of the first names that came to mind when you thought about a UFC champion who had a chance to retire undefeated. A head kick from Holm put that notion to bed for good. However, even without the benefit of hindsight, there are several reasons why Holm Rousey wasn't as big of an upset as Amanda Nunes. Before making a name for herself in MMA, Holm was a world boxing champion and professional kickboxer. Some consider her one of the best female boxers ever. If she was able to keep the Rousey fight on her feet, Holm would be at an advantage. She had a clear path to victory. Furthermore, Rousey hadn't fully proved herself. Most of her fights were quick submissions, most of them ending in armbars. She never went the full 5 rounds. In fact, she never made it past the 3rd round in her entire professional MMA career. Rousey had flaws. We just didn't see them until the Holm fight. But it was naive to think that she couldn't be beaten. Amanda Nunes checks all the boxes that Serra GSP and Holm Rousey didn't. Before the loss to Pena, Nunes established herself as the consensus greatest women's MMA fighter of all time. She beat Miesha Tate for the bantamweight title back in 2016 and defended it 5 times. Nunes also captured the featherweight title in a 51-second finish over Chris Cyborg in 2018 and twice defended that title, which she still holds. Another key factor that makes Amanda Nunes the greatest upset ever is that Nunes is so well-rounded. She can knock you out, she can submit you, she can outpoint you over 25 minutes. Don't believe me? Nunes did all of that during her time as UFC champion. She is elite in every area of MMA, and she has used all of her tools in the cage. Her dominance was very different from Rousey's in that regard. On paper, Pena really had no clear path to victory against Nunes. The prevailing wisdom was that Nunes is by far the better striker, and that she might hold a slight advantage on the ground too, despite the fact that Pena is known for her wrestling. No fighter is invincible, and anything can happen in MMA, but it sure didn't seem like that skill set would be what slayed the Lioness. And the icing on the cake is that Nunes, who had never before been in trouble in a title fight, is still in her prime. There were no signs that Nunes was slowing down, we still don't know if she is or not, or that the gap in skill between the Brazilian and her opponents was getting smaller. Her results in the cage didn't show that. In fact, Nunes was coming off 2 of the easiest wins of her title reign. Nunes was established. Unlike St. Pierre, she was well-rounded. Unlike Rousey, Pena had no clear path to victory, and Nunes is in her prime. And still, she lost. Serra defeating St. Pierre and Holm defeating Rousey are iconic upsets that will live on forever. But Pena submitting Nunes at UFC 269 has to be considered the biggest yet.